Welcome back to the Mindful Healthcare Summit. I'm Dr. Mark Burton, and I'm delighted to be one of your hosts again. In this session, we'll be exploring the power of self-compassion with Dr. Kristin Neff. Dr. Neff is one of the pioneers in the growing field of self-compassion and self-compassion research. She's an associate professor of educational psychology at the University of Texas at Austin. Dr. Neff has co-developed the Mindful Self-Compassion Training Program and is the author of 3 books on self-compassion, including The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself, the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook, and Teaching the Mindful Self-Compassion Program, a guide for professionals. Over the past few years, Dr. Neff has been developing a self-compassion training designed specifically for healthcare providers called Self-Compassion for Healthcare Communities. So Dr. Neff, Kristin, thanks so much for joining us again.
Oh, thanks, Mark. Glad to be talking with you.
Yeah, it's always great to talk to you as well. So this is our second annual summit like this. And in the summit survey last year on the way out, self-compassion turned out to be the #1 topic that the audience wanted to hear more about, which I think you should probably get credit for. If I remember right, you might have been the only speaker last year on the topic. So this year we decided to have a whole day of the summit dedicated to just this topic. It's called Harnessing the Power of Self-Compassion.
Right.
So obviously, if we're going to cover that topic, we should start with just an introduction of what self-compassion is, and maybe tie that to just, how it might relate to strength and resilience.
Sure, absolutely. Well, so the easy way to think of what self-compassion is simply being a kind, supportive friend to yourself, right? So when you're struggling or you failed, you're feeling badly about something, treating yourself with warmth, support, kindness. That's the informal definition, but I also have a more formal definition because I'm also a research scientist. So I've developed a scale to measure self-compassion, and we do a lot of empirical research on it. And so the more scientific definition is that there are 3 components of self-compassion. And it's actually good to know because all 3 components really need to be there for this to be a good, stable, healthy mindset. And the first is actually mindfulness. A lot of people have heard about mindfulness, which is basically the ability to be present with what is without fighting it and resisting it or without ignoring it. And so in the context of compassion, it means being willing to be aware of our struggles, of our pain. Okay, so compassion is mindfulness is a broader construct. You can be mindful of anything, but compassion is always aimed at suffering. It's actually concerned with the alleviation of suffering. So the first thing we have to do is become aware that we're suffering. And that may seem like, duh, that's pretty obvious when I'm suffering, but it's actually often not. Either we're so focused on problem solving that we don't even stop to say, wow, this is really hard. We're just so busy, we're so overwhelmed. That happens a lot for healthcare providers. Or what might happen if you do get overwhelmed is you might get lost in the pain, where all you can see is the problems and you kind of run away with the storyline. You can't be self-compassionate then either. So mindfulness is needed to be able to say, hey, this is really hard right now. And it gives us that little bit of perspective needed to step outside of ourselves and say, oh, wow, you're really struggling. What can I do to help? So we kind of take the perspective of an other toward ourselves, which is one of the key features of self-compassion. And then, of course, we have to be kind to ourselves as opposed to judgmental. And that's easily said, a little harder to do. Actually, my research shows that the vast majority are much harder and more critical and judgmental of themselves than they are to other people. There's a lot of reasons for this. One is I think our culture tells us we should be hard on ourselves. We think it's a good thing to be hard on ourselves. We're afraid of being soft. We're afraid of being complacent. And I'll come back to that later. Also, part of it is just, we don't like the fact that we're imperfect and our life is imperfect. And we want to have control. And, when we criticize ourselves, when we judge ourselves, we kind of maintain the illusion of, well, maybe I didn't get it right, but I should have been able to get it right. And that kind of sense of control that comes with self-criticism actually in an odd way helps us to feel safe. But so if it's a self-compassionate response, it means we're kind and kind of warm and supportive, encouraging as opposed to harshly judgmental. And then really important, what makes this self-compassion and not self-pity is other people, right? So compassion is an inherently connected mind state. The term in the Latin, passion means to suffer, cum means with, to suffer with, right? And so pity is a separate type of mind state. When I pity you, then I'm looking down on you. Or if I'm lost in self-pity, it's like, I'm the only one in the world who has it so terrible, right? It's actually a very self-focused mind state. It's not healthy. So with self-compassion, we remember that, well, everyone's imperfect. Everyone fails. Everyone struggles. This is what life is about. And so when we remember that, and this is actually just a little bit of wisdom, when we remember that we aren't alone and that this is part of the shared human experience, what happens is, first of all, we don't feel so alone. And, loneliness creates a lot of fear. So when we remember we aren't alone, it's not like we're abnormal, it's like nothing's wrong with us for suffering or failing. This is normal, then that actually makes us feel safer. And so when you put these three components together, mindfulness, self-kindness, and common humanity, then we have a self-compassionate mind state. And again, the research is just phenomenal in terms of demonstrating how good it is for our well-being.
Thank you for all that. I mean, there's so much I'd like to follow up on around that, and I want to
It's
come
a
back.
long-winded answer, sorry.
No, it's great. And I want to come back again to the research, but I think there are a couple of things you brought up that are probably specifically interesting in the healthcare community to sort of touch on.
Yeah.
And starting with just the fact that I think that sense of perfectionism and inner drive is I think quite often in my experience, like part of an identity almost. It's like the sense that this is how I got here.
Yes.
And it can be really challenging to imagine even letting go of that with to approach anything with that attitude of self-care, can seem letting go of that drive in essence. I know it isn't, but it can seem that way.
It can seem that way. Yeah. And so by the way, self-criticism, it does work as a motivator. Many a person has gotten through med school, right, because of this relentless self-criticism. But it works kind of the way like a smoky, old-fashioned coal-powered steam engine works. It gets you up the hill, but it spits out a lot of black smoke. And that black smoke makes things harder than they need to be. It creates a sense of anxiety, constant anxiety, creates more stress, creates more pressure. And of course, that could lead to things like hypertension, so it's not good for your health. And so self-compassion, we do motivate ourselves with compassion. We can also have high standards, really high standards for ourselves with compassion. The whole difference is what happens when we don't meet those standards, right? And this is the key. And I know it's so hard for healthcare workers because people expect you to be perfect, and the results of making a mistake could be life or death. And so the stakes are really high. So self-compassion doesn't mean letting go of your standards of excellence. It doesn't mean like slacking off in any sort of preparation you do or any sort of fact-finding you do. But when the inevitable happens, which is you are a human being and you're going to fall a little short of your standards, you might even make a mistake in some way, how do you deal with that? That's the thing that self-compassion gives you. So if the way you normally deal with, being a little less than perfect is slamming yourself with judgment, thinking it's going to make you better, it actually doesn't. First of all, what often happens is if you feel a real sense of shame, like, oh, I just can't believe that happened, it's going to be much harder for you to admit that you made a mistake, right? And that's actually not good. If you're so afraid of admitting your errors that you can't see your errors, how in the world are you going to correct them, right? And so self-compassion gives us the safety to say, I blew it, or, that I came up short, or that wasn't as good as I want it to be. And then, right, instead of just hanging our heads in shame or slamming ourselves, which first of all makes us nervous, it actually doesn't, shame is not exactly a get up and go mind state, right? So what it does is it encourages us to, first of all, see what we can learn from the situation, right? I mean, it's truism, failure is our best teacher, but it's true, failure is our best teacher. And so with self-compassion, we can see, okay, well, this happens. What happened? What went wrong? Let's unpack the situation and let's do everything in our power to make sure it doesn't happen again, right? And so when we do this with encouragement, so we don't think, I want to do better because I'm a horrible person unless I do better. That doesn't help. But I want to do better because I care. I care about my job. I care about my patients. I care about myself. And that motivational force of care is like, a really powerful electric, train. It gets you up the hill without spitting out all that smoke. It's actually more efficient and more effective.
It's interesting when I hear you talk about it that way, because it's almost like an inner dialogue, and it sounded natural in hearing about that would also might relate to how you talk to others about those sorts of situations. So much is written in medicine about the importance of communication in medical care and how much that drives happiness for everyone, patient care improves, and it seems like it might relate to that as well.
Yes, yeah. And so, I'm going to be honest, we don't have a lot of research, for instance, showing do self-compassionate healthcare workers have better patient outcomes. We don't, we'll probably will get that at some point. We don't at this point, but what we do know is, first of all, it allows for a lot more authenticity, right? Mm-hmm. So when you're comfortable with yourself and you aren't hiding things or hiding your side that you judge, you're able to be more authentic, which helps facilitate communication. So there's lots of research showing that self-compassionate people can communicate more authentically, and that's good for everyone. And then the other thing that happens is, so we know from research that self-compassion is contagious, right? And not contagious in the way a virus is contagious, but contagious in there's actually a research study that said, is self-compassion contagious? And the answer was yes. What they did was they looked at people talking self-compassionately out loud. And what they found is when people hear someone else speaking self-compassionately, about a mistake or something they're struggling with, that actually increases their self-compassion as well, right? And so if you're self-compassionate as a healthcare worker and you make these, statements aloud, again, it's not like, oh, poor me, but it's like, well, let's work on that one. And, well, I'm only human, and let's see how we can improve the situation. So kind of very supportive, encouraging, warm, kind of like a good coach, that type of self-talk that helps other people be more self-compassionate as well. So it really does help everyone.
Mm-hmm. Actually, that brings me back around to another thing you said at the start that seems important to touch on too, which is, if self-compassion can change like the culture almost around you, which is an amazing thing, because that comes back to talking about mindfulness. But I do think there's often also an implied message in healthcare and healthcare training that we're not supposed to struggle. We're not supposed to be suffering. We're supposed to be able to soldier through. I think that may be changing. There's a lot more written, in the middle of this crisis about, the suffering of healthcare workers, which that awareness I think is useful. But I do think there's an implicit message sometimes, of not being mindful, that we're not supposed to acknowledge this in essence.
Right, right. And the thing is, when you do that, when you don't acknowledge your own pain, or you don't acknowledge actually the situation, you're actually being less sensitive to the situation, right? And so one of the reasons people go into healthcare is they have got good empathy skills, right? They're good at connecting with other people. That's often why people are drawn to healthcare. And good empathy skills is also what allows you to be a good clinician, right? When you know what the other person needs, you can kind of read between the lines, and kind of that sense of intuition. It seems like intuition, but often it's empathy, And what we know about how the brain works is big portion of the real estate of the brain is devoted toward empathic resonance. I actually feel what you feel. When you feel happy, I feel happy inside. The happiness neurons, and they aren't really happiness neurons, but my brain is registering that happiness. And if you feel sad or pain, I'm registering that. And that's what allows us to be connected. And so if we don't feel pain or struggle, what that means is we are not being empathic. We're shut down. If we aren't mindful, then we're shut down. And if we're shut down, we can't be effective at our jobs. Right? So we need to be open, we need to be sensitive, but we need to do it in a safe way, right? And so if I get overwhelmed by the stress of the environment, or if I get overwhelmed by your pain, then I can't do my job, and that's not helpful, right? But if I give myself compassion for those feelings of overwhelm, this is so stressful, this is so difficult, then what happens is we create a buffer. We create a buffer over those feelings of overwhelm that allow us to stay centered. And so mindfulness does this too. Mindfulness is very, very important in terms of grounding ourselves and centering ourselves. But I really think mindfulness is not enough. If it's just mindfulness, if it's just awareness, here I am, centering, calm, we also need the warmth, okay? Because as human beings, warmth, care, kindness. This is what makes human beings tick. You know, we're mammals. We evolved with the attachment system, with the caregiving system, displays of affection, care, kindness, support. This is what ultimately makes us feel safe. And so when we can do that for ourselves, which might be with a kind word or, you know, a little kind gesture or just some sense of, hey, you know, I'm here for myself. I got my own back. That sense of warmth and support makes a huge difference in our ability to get through.
Yeah, it's a whole other perspective to sort of treat ourselves as well as we might treat somebody else.
Yes, yeah,
Something more
exactly.
instinctual.
Yes.
I had one other thing just in terms of the sort of definition you gave I wanted to touch on before sort of transitioning to the research, because I thought it was maybe another level. It related to something you said, which was about control, you know, about wanting to control situations. Because I think one of the stresses, I think, of medicine in general, but also certainly that's being escalated over the last, you know, year, is dealing with uncertainty in medicine.
Yes.
And, you know, it's sometimes I think self-compassion comes up when we make mistakes, but
Yeah,
sometimes it's that, like you said, people expect us to have answers and there aren't
that's
always
right.
answers. And we're trying to control a situation that has no, you know, yes, no answer to it. And I
Right.
was curious if you had any thoughts on that or how it might relate.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is that is the truth, right? We don't always know. There is uncertainty. And I think, you know, personally, it's a problem if you pretend that you know when you don't,
Mhm.
right? I mean, I understand that people expect us to, and there may be even be a way where you've got to kind of, you know, act as if you know the answers just to make other people feel comfortable. But you shouldn't buy into it, right? In other words, you shouldn't buy into the idea that you should know or that there should be certainty, because the truth is there's not. And so really what we can do is we can try to be as comfortable and supportive toward ourselves as we navigate that uncertainty, right? And we really don't have many other options. I mean, the option of everything being certain and safe and no problems is just, it's just not an option, you know? And so how do we deal with that reality of living a human life? How do you deal with the reality that people expect you to be perfect even though you're only an imperfect human being? Well, first of all, you've got to acknowledge the pain of that. That's hard. You know, we can't just pretend it's not there. It is there, and it's hard, and it causes stress, and it causes, you know, difficulty and pain, and sometimes even grief. Maybe, you know, maybe there was some medical error, and you have a lot of grief. You know, that's the reality. And so, the more we can open to that and accept that this is the reality, the more we'll be able to cope with that reality more effectively, right? And the more support and warmth we give ourselves in the face of that reality, the more likely it is that we'll make good steps going forward, although we can never completely control it, you know? And that is just, that's part of life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
And
okay.
yeah, it
You know,
is. It
life
doesn't
becomes
always feel that
boring,
way.
wouldn't it? If we also, I mean, we'd be cut out, we'd be like statues if we knew everything that was going to happen.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. It's a great thing to be able to bring some sense of just, you know, even in making decisions in medicine, to say, like, I did the best I could with that. There was all the information I had, you
Yeah.
know, as opposed to continuing that compulsion to do more and more and more.
And someone might say, well, that's not good enough, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
And if they do, well, you know, then that's painful.
Right.
Ouch. You know,
Yeah.
so it's kind of like, just because they say that doesn't mean it's true.
Right.
Right. So
So,
someone
so
says
let's
that's not good
transition.
enough. It's like, oh, can I hold the pain of that? Someone expects me to be perfect, even though I'm only a human being. You
Yeah.
know, they may not be able to hold it, but you can.
Yeah, so I mean, thank you for all that. And I think, so let's transition. I know over the last several years, and I haven't actually heard much about this specific program. You've been piloting a program specifically for healthcare providers, and you
Yes.
published some research findings recently about the providers who participated. So can you tell me, you know, what you looked at, what you found so far?
Yeah. So, well, as you know, we have an 8-week training program called Mindful Self-Compassion. It's 2.5 hours once a week for 8 weeks. It has meditation, a lot of practice. And we wanted to bring this to healthcare workers, and there's just no way in the world. They don't have time. They don't have 2.5 hours once a week. Also, we got feedback that, you know, most healthcare workers don't have time to meditate. Now some do, and it's great if you do have time to meditate, but the feedback we got was we need practices we can do on the job while we're working. I don't have an extra minute outside of my work hours to practice. I need to be able to practice while I'm working in something in a way that doesn't take any extra time. So we developed a training program that was six 1-hour sessions over the course of 6 weeks. And we did it at lunch because people have to eat anyway, right? So no extra time. And it used practices like practices you can do when you're walking down the hall from room to room, or things you can do in the moment, like, doing a supportive gesture, or things you can just say to yourself internally, or practice you could do at the bedside of a patient. So it took no extra time out. And it worked really well. It worked really well. We actually did, we just published this, we did 2 studies. The first one was a randomized controlled trial with a waitlist control group. And we found that, that the program increased self-compassion, it increased compassion for others, it increased mindfulness. This is without meditation. It increased mindfulness, it increased compassion satisfaction, and it reduced stress. And then we did a follow-up study. We didn't have a control group for this one, unfortunately, but we wanted to measure burnout because burnout's a big issue in healthcare, obviously. So we found that the program significantly reduced burnout. So in terms of secondary traumatic stress, burnout, things like depression. We also looked at well-being outcomes like depression, and again, increased a sense of personal accomplishment in your work. And so not only are the numbers good, the people really gave us very positive feedback about the program, and they're still teaching it at the hospital that we developed it. So I'm really excited about this. We actually teach the program now online at the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion, so anyone can take it. Yes, it's about great. 3 years of work, and it just came out like last month, so I'm very excited.
Congratulations on that.
Yeah.
That's really great. Are there any? I don't. Sometimes practices I know don't work fully outside of a program, but is there any practices or just perspectives that are different than what you've talked about so far that come out of that program you might mention? Like, what are the sort of in the moment things you're working with?
Right. Well, so I mean, believe it or not, the practices are pretty much the same as in the longer program, but again, they're all designed to be done in the moment. So again, a meditation we do a meditation where we breathe in compassion for ourselves and breathe out compassion for another. In this case, you do this when you're with a patient. You breathe in compassion for yourself. This is so hard for me, or I don't know what to do, or I'm feeling overwhelmed, or I'm burnout, or I'm stressed. And you breathe out for the patient. They're having a hard time, they're struggling with whatever health issue they're going through. And so things like this, we just put it in the context of the work environment, and it seemed to really work. And so little things like, so one mindfulness practice, for instance, we teach is just feeling the soles of your feet on the ground. This is actually an empirically supported practice that helps calm and stabilize you. One thing, because when you're putting your focus on one pointed attention, the soles of your feet on the ground, anytime you focus your attention, it tends to calm and settle the mind. And also, there's no empirical research for this, but I think it's because you get your attention as far away as your brain as humanly possible. And you're also literally grounding yourself to the earth. And so they would just do this practice, again, walking from room to room, feeling the soles of their feet on the ground. Also lots of little gestures, like, maybe when you go see a patient, maybe just like folding your arms or something, or maybe you got your clipboard folding, but you're actually doing it not just like to hold your clipboard, but also just to say, whoa, this is really hard. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling so tired right now, And so one of the things we know, again, this is empirically, there's empirical evidence for this. Self-compassion impacts the nervous system, right? So it decreases sympathetic activity, things like cortisol and like interleukin-6, which is a marker of inflammation, and it increases heart rate variability. So it decreases sympathetic activity and increases parasympathetic activity. And there's also research that shows that it enhances immune function and decreases physical symptoms of illness. And so basically, when you change the way you relate to yourself, it impacts the nervous system, your body's physiological function, and actually helps you to be literally calmer as you go about your day.
Oh, thank you. Those all sound those are some of my favorite in healthcare practices. So I think it's great. And I love the practice of, taking in compassion and giving back compassion, because I think it's
Yes,
so, missing sometimes from the public perception of mindfulness, that it's not like a self-help program. Like the deeper intention, which I think is so important, and
that's right.
sometimes even in motivating healthcare providers or parents that I work with a lot, is recognizing that the really deep roots of the practice and meaning of the practice is that it changes, that level of interaction with everybody else.
Yes, absolutely. And so I'm not a healthcare worker, but, I write a lot about this. I'm an autism parent, so I was definitely, by the way, my son's 18 now. He's got his license. Like freedom. He's like driving himself everywhere. But when he was younger, it was, it was really challenging, with the autism. And I just really saw the amazing difference when I was caring for him that self-compassion made. So first of all, it prevented me from getting overwhelmed, right? When he would have like an ear-splitting tantrum, I would give myself compassion for how hard it was, and that would keep me grounded and stable. But also what happened, and this happens anytime two people get together. So like I said, we have this ability for empathic resonance. So you impact me, but I also impact you. So if you're in pain or you're having a tantrum, which happened with my son, right, then I would get like really activated. I would see like he was like a mirror for me. If I would get more activated and like I get frustrated or overwhelmed, he would ramp up. But when I could remember to give myself compassion for, this is so hard, I'm feeling overwhelmed, this is so difficult, then I would calm myself down and he would calm down, right? And so we're always impacting each other. And the idea that, somehow we could even possibly give compassion to others and not ourselves, or vice versa, it's an illusion, because we aren't separate. Our brains did not evolve for us to be separate. We are constantly impacting each other. So how I treat myself impacts you. How I treat you impacts me. I mean, it's always back and forth in interaction. And so it just breaks my heart sometimes when I hear caregivers say that they think self-compassion is selfish. They should be focused on the other person, maybe because they're suffering more. It doesn't work that way. The more you give to yourself, the more you have to give to others. So,
yeah. And that's kind of the core of it all, I think.
Yeah.
So I know we're going to end with a practice that I'm looking forward to having you guide, but I'd like to just give you an opportunity, just because since we're focusing initially on that smaller research study you did, maybe just if you can just give a few minutes on just the general neuroscience of what we're talking about with self-compassion, before we transition to the practice. I think people, in this group in particular, might be interested in that. So, in the broadest sense, what have you seen about the physiology and sort of the brain science of this?
Right. So there's more work on the nervous system, things like, sympathetic nervous system activity than there is on brain function. But there are a few studies of the brain. And so one of the things we see, which you would expect, is that amygdala reactivity goes down. Right. And so kind of what's happening is when we care, and by the way, I'm going to admit there are a couple brain studies, and I'm not very good with parts of the brain, so I don't want to. I could make a stab at it, but I know one of your viewers, I can say she got that wrong, so I'm not even going to attempt it. So there's a there's a few brain studies, and if you're interested, by the way, you can go to my website. It's all organized by category. You can look at self-compassion and physiology, and you'll find those brain studies there. But basically, it tends to work by calming down like things like amygdala reactivity. So. But there's a lot of research on things like cortisol, salivary cortisol, and heart rate variability is a big one. So self-compassion definitely increases heart rate variability. And we know that enhances flexible responding, which is heart rate variability is a really good marker that, I'm calm, I'm centered, I'm ready to respond in a way that's flexible, which is very useful.
Great. Thank you. So before we transition to the practice.
I just admit that's my self-compassion practice. I could admit that I'm not a neuroscientist expert. I'm a psychologist, for goodness sake. Anyway.
So yeah, we all. So before we transition to the practice, is there anything you want to add for healthcare providers that I haven't brought up or asked you about yet? So I want to leave you time for the practice as well.
Yeah, well, maybe just that, that compassion is, you always have to include yourself in the circle of compassion, right? And you can adjust the ratio. Like sometimes you need to focus more on yourself. Sometimes you need to focus more on your patient. It's not like it's just one size fits all. But if you exclude yourself from the circle of compassion and you just focus on your patients, you're going to be depleting your resources, which is actually going to limit your ability to care for others. So if you just think of that, compassion for myself and others, as opposed to either or, I think it creates the right type of mindset for, for ultimate, for good caregiving, really.
Yeah. So in the end, it helps, with that sort of foundation of strength and resilience that we all want to bring to what we're doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it does. Yeah.
So can you introduce tell us a little bit about the practice you wanted to guide, and then I'll let you take over for now. So.
Yeah, okay. So self-compassion, like I said, it involves mindfulness and kind of care. And so the mindfulness aspect of self-compassion is really directed toward, first of all, just allowing things to be as they are, not fighting them and resisting them. So, the mindfulness says, this is how it is. And the compassion is concern for the alleviation of suffering. So the compassion is like, I wish it weren't so. It's like, I admit that it is so, that's mindfulness, but I also wish that I weren't so, and I'm motivated to try to help if I can, which is the kindness. So this practice actually, when we work with difficult emotions, and what we'll do is we'll use some mindfulness practices just to kind of, first of all, identify what's happening with us and allow it to be so. And then we'll give us some kindness and care and warmth because it's difficult. And then we'll go back to allowing it to be so. So it's a really useful practice for working with difficult emotions. It's one of my favorite practices. It's the one I do at 3 in the morning when I wake up with the problems of the day, like just right in the forefront of my mind. Then I do this practice, and it also helps you fall asleep if you're interested in that. Which I know a lot of people in COVID, they have trouble falling asleep. This practice is actually quite good for that. Okay. So go ahead and close your eyes. Just settle into your body. Feel your feet on the floor if you're sitting. You can also do this laying down. It's a nice way to do this if you want. You can lie down on your sofa or the floor or your bed. Okay, so I would invite you to call to mind something that's happening in your life right now that is difficult. It's difficult to deal with. Okay, so this could be a relationship issue. It could be some work issue. It could be linked to the pandemic, right? Maybe you're feeling lonely. Maybe you're sick. Maybe you know someone who's sick. Or it could be just the feelings of overwhelm, right? So focus on one issue, but try not to pick anything that makes you immediately feel overwhelmed, because if you're feeling really overwhelmed, it's going to be harder for you to do the practice. So choose something that's difficult, but that's not overwhelmingly difficult. Okay, so just settle on one thing for now. And call the situation to mind, right? What's happening? Who are the people involved, if there are any? What's the situation? And as you think about the situation, you should feel a little bit uncomfortable, right? It's not a pleasant situation. It's difficult, not overwhelming. Okay, so now I'd invite you to ask yourself, what emotions am I feeling right now? as a result of this situation. Okay, so it may be fear or sadness, stress, frustration, loneliness, hopelessness, right? Just kind of become curious. And you might be feeling more than one emotion. And so when you notice that you're feeling an emotion, just kind of give it a soft mental note. Ah, I see, that's sadness. Or, ah, that's fear. Kind of an objective but friendly noting, the labeling of what's present. Okay, and so now see if you can determine what seems to be the strongest emotion you're feeling right now. Right, this may be really obvious. And if so, you can just repeat the label of that emotion. You may have a few emotions, right? In which case, just kind of arbitrarily pick what seems to be the strongest. Sometimes what we're feeling is actually confusion. So you can also just choose to work with confusion. Okay. And now see if you can locate where you feel that emotion in your body. Okay, where do you literally feel it? Is it a tightness in your throat or a sinking in your chest, right? Pounding in your stomach, maybe just an overall sense of dis-ease. So just see if you can locate it as a physical sensation. And become kind of curious, like, well, what does this emotion feel like in my body? Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it moving? Is it sharp? Is it dull? Right, so just feeling it in your body. And usually difficult emotions, there's some sort of tension in the body where we feel it. So see if you can relax your body a little bit around the emotion. Just kind of soften your body. Right, you might imagine that it's kind of melting around the emotion, or like it's becoming more porous, relaxing. So you're just kind of loosening, softening. So what we're doing here is we're giving a little less resistance to the emotion, physically softening our resistance to feeling this. Okay, so, but it hurts to feel this, right? This is a difficult emotion. So we also want to soothe and comfort ourselves because it hurts. So one way to do that is to put a hand over the place in your body where you're feeling the emotion. So, and if you don't really know where you're feeling it, you can just put a hand over your heart. But as much as possible, put a hand over where you feel the emotion. And kind of use your hand, touch yourself with the type of gentle pressure that you might use with a friend who was upset or a child, right? So kind of a soft pressure. Kind of let the care just stream through your hands, right? As your hand recognizes this is really hard to feel this. Now allowing yourself to feel supported by your own touch and also cared for by your own touch. And then adding in some language, right? Which is just what you need to hear in the midst of this situation, right? So these may be words of reassurance, it's going to be okay. Or maybe, you aren't alone in this. Or if the situation is, you're feeling badly about yourself, it may be something like, I accept you just as you are, flaws and all. Or I'm here for you. Or maybe the situation is something where you need some strength and courage. So maybe it's like, I got your back. It's not okay, whatever's happening. So just really asking yourself, what do I need to hear in this difficult situation to care for myself? And if you don't know, you could also imagine, what would I say to a dear friend in a similar situation? Really just allowing yourself to receive this support and this care from yourself. And then finally, you can put your hand down if you want. Finally, see if you can simply allow the emotion to be there. Right? This is how it is in this moment. In the future, hopefully you can do something about the situation, but right now, this instant, can you simply accept that this is how it is? Can you allow yourself to be just as you are in this moment? So we're softening toward our pain. We're soothing ourselves because of our pain. And we are allowing the pain to be just as it is, but with an open heart. Then when you're ready, you can open your eyes.
Well, thank you for that, Kristin. That was wonderful.
You're welcome.
And are there any last words you want to end with today? Those are some good words to end with, but.
Well, yeah, maybe just so sometimes just to know, some people maybe who did that practice, you're actually feeling maybe not so good right now. Maybe you're feeling a little activated. Just to know that that is normal. It's actually a good sign, right? So often the way we deal with the pain of life is we close our hearts. And then when we do a practice like that, we start to open our hearts. And sometimes what happens is, the fresh air of love rushes in and like the pain rushes out. So it's not a problem. It does not mean you're doing it wrong. It actually does mean you're just opening your heart, but it may mean you need to go a little more slowly, and some people, when they practice self-compassion, it's even, let's say you've got a trauma history, it can be helpful even to do this with the therapist to kind of help you work through some of the issues causing, we actually call it backdraft. It's like, when you let air into a fire in a house, and the house like explodes. Self-compassion can be that way sometimes. Again, it's normal, but just to know if that is your experience, it's not a bad thing at all. It's just part of the transformation process.
Great. Okay, thank you for that. So, well, I appreciate everyone being here today, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity to talk to you again, Kristin. I'm glad you're getting an opportunity to do that work with healthcare providers. I think it's going to bring a lot to the profession. I hope everyone enjoyed the session today, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kristin.
Thank you.